Hey y'all, and welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be looking at a chess game that I played recently, which is probably one of the greatest games that I think I've ever played in my entire life. And that's not because I hit like 100% accuracy or something, or I like did everything like perfectly correct. No, it's because I kind of understood the positions properly, and I feel like I played this game like I would play like a classical game, even though it's only a 10 minute. So let's get into it. My opponent starts off the game with knight f3. I decide to play the move d5. This is a very common opening. It's not the most popular opening. e4 and d4 are obviously more popular, but knight f3 is completely reasonable, and my opponent decides to immediately switch it over to a English with the move c4, which is okay. Of course, that you're not really supposed to take this pawn. If you take this pawn, you're kind of giving white the whole center with the move e4. Sorry. White will be able to win this pawn back in the future. The knight's going to come out here, and in all likelihood, white is probably slightly better. So we don't play like that. Instead, I decided to play this pretty reasonably. I didn't want to do anything too crazy. The main move here after c4 is to play the move d4, sorry. Simply taking space and arguing that black is a little bit better. But I decided not to do that. I decided to be a little more solid, so I played the move c6. Which is a move and basically just saying, okay, if you take here, I'm going to take in the center, and black's going to be slightly better because of all this, and I'm probably going to be, equal, but I like my position. Instead of that, my opponent decides to play move g3, which makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to get into bishop g2 here. Very common setup in the ready. I decide to also do the same thing with knight f6 and bishop g2 and then the move g6. My opponent decides to shock me here with this very, very interesting move, queen to a4, which I'm pretty sure that I've seen this move on a couple of different occasions, but not enough for me to really like spend the time and learn it. So I'm not entirely like certain on all the ideas here, on all like the things that I'm supposed to do. And queen a4 came as a little bit of a shock to me. So I had to start thinking here. And I was thinking, okay, so queen a4, what is it doing? What's his main idea? His main idea is obviously he wants to pin this pawn, so he wants to take on d5, and he doesn't want me to recapture the pawn, which makes a lot of sense, because if I'm able to recapture the pawn, then black is actually doing quite well with the center control and everything. Well, it's equal, but, you know, my opponent is trying to get some winning chances. I decided that, of course, I can play the move like bishop d7 or something and argue, okay, then you're going to take, well, you're not going to take now, but I mean, this is probably like reasonable, but I thought my opponent, what he's probably going to do is not take right away, and he's going to do something else, and my bishop is kind of on the wrong square, so I decided to play that, and I realized that actually I don't think that this pawn capturing here and not allowing me to take back with the pawn is that big of a deal, and so I ended up playing the move bishop to g7, which is the right move. And I'm simply developing a bishop. Now, it's not over, and I immediately mess up. My opponent takes on d5, which made a lot of sense to me. Of course, that's his idea, and I'm going to castle next, so he has to do it now. And I decided, after a little bit of thought, I decided to play the wrong move. I ended up playing the move. Well, there's a couple of things I can do. What I should have done immediately is taking on d5. And simply saying, okay, well, even though you're going to get the move like, let's say e4, for example, I can already start chasing your queen away, and actually black is doing quite well. And if you play the move d4, which is the top engine move, coming in between this bishop, well, then, I mean, I'm just going to play normal moves. I'm probably going to castle, play a move like bishop f5, bishop g4, and I'm going to play for the idea of e5 in the future. I'm not scared of this move e4 because of the move knight b6, and I'm going to be arguing that the knight is actually better placed on this square, and this knight is going to be the one charging into the attack. I mean, well, into the counterplay. But instead, I play the move queen takes d5. And the reason why this is wrong is actually pretty obvious. What I had calculated here from a distance was that, okay, I thought my opponent, what he's going to do is going to castle, and then I just thought, you know what, my queen's actually kind of doing fine in the center. Like, I don't see any way for my opponent to really target my queen. Like, there's no good discovered attacks with the knight. Like, okay, this isn't an issue ever. This isn't an issue. I'm just, I think I'm doing actually pretty well here. But then I just realized that I missed the most obvious move, which is the move, simple move really, the move knight to c3. and my opponent is developing a knight while hitting my queen, so obviously black is a little bit worse. And now I have to deal with that. I'm forced to play the move queen to d8. Of course, if I do anything else, then my queen would be in the way and probably be chased around a little bit more, and probably I would be losing, so I have to go queen d8. My opponent castles, I castle, and as you can see from this position, my opponent's next few moves are pretty easy, because what they're going to do, they're just going to take the center. They're going to put both pawns in the center, and for like a lower rated player, let's say like even like slightly lower rated, let's say like 1800, these positions are very, very difficult to play, simply because of the space advantage. White's space advantage is so strong that if you don't know what you're doing, black is probably just gonna lose. And I had to like figure this out like immediately, because I mean I'm under pressure. My opponent immediately plays the move d4, which is clearly the best move. E4 doesn't make as much sense here, simply because okay, now this pawn is kind of like a target. It's getting in the way of the bishop. Already, computer's giving some weird lines like the move c5, trying to play knight c6, and like this move, we get like knight even to g4, and this pawn is almost lost, which is insane. Like it can get really dicey really quickly. So e4 really isn't what he has to do, so he has to go d4. I decide here to play another move that was a little bit inaccurate, kind of on a whim. So I spent like 9 seconds, and I played this move that didn't make much sense, but made sense a little bit to me, which was the move bishop to g4. And the reason why I played this move was simply because it's a common idea in these positions. But then I realized that it's not a common idea in these positions. It's a common idea in positions that look like it, but in this specific position, it doesn't really work. And bishop g4 is inaccurate because after the simple move h3, my idea, of course, was to take the knight, seeing as I had 5 pawns on the light squares. And I mean, I could even get like 6 here in a little bit. Probably wouldn't play that move. Probably play a5. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to trade the knight and life is good. But then I kind of realized that this isn't what I want, because trading this knight isn't that good for black, because maybe it actually helps white get more pieces towards the center. And I realized this too late after I played the move, and now I'm forced to play into this. I thought, okay, if I do anything else, what am I doing? If I put the bishop here, obviously this is stupid, blocking my e-pawn. e5 is the only source of counterplay in this position. If I put my bishop on f5, I thought my opponent could even play the move g4, and I didn't see like a good way to target this pawn structure, and I thought that I was already almost losing, which is correct, but actually bishop f5 is the best move. Actually, no, sorry, bishop trading with the knight is the best move. Bishop f5 is second best, and I thought, okay, if I go back to c8, what am I doing? That would be stupid. We're not going to do that. That would be a huge concession, so I have to take on f3. And I spent some time on this move, as you can see, 5 seconds, because I was a little bit indecisive. And after bishop takes f3, of course, taking like this is a little bit instructive. You can't take with the e-pawn, even though it would make sense to kind of get your pawns like this, because what ends up happening is this pawn becomes an immediate weakness. You don't have the space advantage anymore, and actually black is immediately able to target it with moves like knight bd7. And the idea is that I'm simply going to go knight b6, probably put a knight here, and this pawn becomes a major weakness in the white position, where actually black is probably doing better. So my opponent took with the bishop, and I thought here for a very long time. Actually, I don't think I did. I don't think I thought here for very long, but there was a lot of things going on in my head. I had to figure out a couple of different ideas. One of the ideas I had was to play the move queen d7 or queen c8, simply going after the pawn on h3 and saying that, okay, after bishop g2, maybe I've made an improvement. Probably not queen d7, probably queen c8, because this at least allows the rook to get in, doesn't block the knight's entryway. So I thought maybe queen c8, targeting this pawn after bishop g2. I'm like, okay, this is kind of better for me, maybe because maybe I get a rook here, maybe I'm doing well. Then I realized, isn't bishop g2 where the bishop wants to be anyway? Like, the bishop would love to be on the g2 square. The bishop is doing pretty much nothing on the f3 square, and if it moved back to g2, like if this position I don't know. Let's say, how do I do this? Here, 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 here. This position would be significantly better for white than the original position. Here, see, it jumps up by a whole point too, because the bishop would be better placed. And I realized this during the game, so I ended up playing a much better move. I ended up going after another plan. I went with this move, knight bd7, which is the best move in the position. And the idea is very, very simple. I'm simply going to go knight b6. I'm going to take control of this square. In the future, I'm going to play rook e8, maybe queen c7, maybe put this knight on this square, and I'm going to play the move e5. That's my idea. Literally, my entire idea is that. And that's actually very, very accurate. And I don't waste time by chasing the bishop away, but because the queen on c8 or the queen on d7 actually isn't an improvement to the position. The queen is perfectly placed where it is, targeting this pawn and doing pretty good. So this is obviously the best move. Well, not obviously, but it is the best move, logically. My opponent goes with the move rook d1. It makes a lot of sense. A little bit instructive here also why they can't play e4 immediately. And the reason basically is that, okay, at the end of the day, after knight b6, sorry, not knight b6. No, I immediately play the move e5, right? I start targeting their center. Let's say they take, I take back with the knight. And actually this position is a little bit tricky to play with white. They probably have to go bishop g2. And I don't know, I mean, I can probably do anything. Like, I don't know. Like this just doesn't seem like the right option here to play e5 immediately. So my opponent didn't do that. I mean e4 immediately. So my opponent didn't do that, and instead played rook d1, which is the best move in the position. And I simply follow my plan. What I could have done instead of my plan, because my plan isn't actually the right option, I could have played the move queen to c7, with the idea of playing e5 in the future. And even looking at it now with like the engine, it doesn't seem like what I want to do. Simply because, well, the idea of it is to play e5 and get out of this rook pressure on the d file, but I didn't think this was correct, because even if I get like the move e5, I thought that maybe my opponent would have like bishop f5 in the future, and I wasn't too sure about this. I thought that my opponent would have like a decent amount of play here, and I was just a little bit about the position, so I didn't play this. I instead went over to the move knight to b6. Of course, I saw queen c7 during the game, but I said what to move knight to b6, and I'm like, okay, I'm hitting the queen, and I'm kind of shifting my attention over to the queen side. One thing I thought my opponent could do, which I think they didn't do very well in the game, is they could have played the move queen to b3, and I just thought this move was, ooh, that's loud. I thought this move was like ages more accurate than the move that I played, which was queen to c2, simply because queen to b3 just looks better. Like, okay, now my knight can't move, for example. Like, isn't that just an immediate improvement of the position? Queen c2 is much more passive than queen b3, so I immediately thought, after the move queen c2, I thought maybe black is kind of in the game. Like, I feel like I'm playing here. I don't really know what my opponent's ideas are. I thought, okay, I kind of like my position. Just a little bit. I couldn't see the eval bar, of course, even though it's plus 1.3. But I thought I kind of liked my position here, and I felt like my opponent was going wrong. So I played the top engine move. I put my knight on d5 pretty quickly. I go knight fd5. It's obviously the best move, in my opinion. Right? It is the best move. Okay, computer saying some garbage, but knight fd5 is up there among the best moves. Knight fd5. And basically I'm just saying, okay, my knight's going to d5. This is where it wants to be. And some of you might be wondering why I didn't put the b knight on d5. And the reason why I didn't do this is because actually this knight has some prospects on the queen side, first of all. Like, it's able to get over here and do some havoc on the c4 square in some variations. And this knight on this square actually could be the target of some bishop g5 in some lines. And if we're looking at the prospects of this knight, just figuratively, okay, we look at this. It can't go here, can't go here. This is really the only square it can go to. Is it really going to come back and go for e5? I don't really think so. It feels like putting this knight on d5 is a decent bit better than putting this knight on d5, because this knight has ideas of going forward elsewhere, and this knight does not. Also, bishop g5 I was a little bit worried about. So I play knight fd5, which is the right move, and my opponent immediately surprises me. My opponent plays a very, very lazy move. My opponent plays the move a3. And I realize here that now I'm in business. Now my opponent's dropped the ball, and now I'm probably going to be able to get a decent advantage, and I'm going to be trying to win the game. A3 does nothing. A3 does nothing. The only thing that it does is stops knight b4, which really wasn't even an idea. It just wasn't even like, I mean, I was thinking about it, obviously. I'm like looking at moves, but no, knight b4 was never the main plan. And I realized that this gives me just basically an extra tempo to do whatever I want. Of course, my opponent should play the move e4 here. Of course, they should play the move e4, and I would probably be in a worse position. I would, like, just regularly, I would be probably in a worse position here. But a3, and this gives me an extra tempo to do whatever I want. So I switch my brain over to the other plan, which is the move e5, and I have to go for this move eventually. So I play the move rook to e8, one more preparatory move preparing e5, and I thought, okay, after black gets e5, it becomes an entirely different game where white is probably not even having what they want anymore, probably not even having the space advantage, and I'm going to have a pretty decent game. My opponent makes another inaccuracy with the move e4. Even though it looks like a decent move, kicking my knight out of the center, I had this all calculated, and after the move knight takes c3, b takes c3, I play the move e5, which is just an awesome, awesome move. And the idea is that even though my opponent can take on e5 with a tempo, they're just going to lose the pawn. What they could have done here, it's a little bit insane. The only reason this is actually even good for white, like I bet like you're thinking about like moves like d5, which makes sense to me. Like, okay, that's a move that like obviously you should look at. But actually, this isn't even good after like CD, ED. I mean, I'm even considering like moves like F5 here, for example. No, okay, maybe Queen D6 then, trying to stop some stuff. Okay, maybe I'm silly. Maybe I'm just bad at this game. I never know. That could be an option. Actually, Queen F6 is the move. Okay, great. Thanks, computer. No, but I'm like, okay, this position is probably like pretty reasonable for white. Like, this is kind of what they want to do with d5, but it doesn't actually work. The only move that keeps advantage for white, d takes e5 is the second best move, actually. The only move that keeps advantage for white is crazy. And in all honesty, you should probably like pause the video to find it. It's an insane idea. Yeah, so the idea is this crazy move a4, which is just unfindable. Like, that, I would never even consider this move, because to me, I mean, okay, it looks like it loses a pawn. Like, doesn't this just lose a pawn, right? But actually, my opponent has so much play here after the move a5 and knight c8 that my opponent can sack another pawn. I probably should take this one with a rook or play c5. Actually, I can't play c5 because I dropped this pawn and I'm losing. There's just nothing I can do. After like a move like rook takes e5, my opponent immediately goes in with a6, and it's game over. What I have to do here is play knight e7 and follow this kind of forcing line. Bishop b2, targeting the bishop, which is pinned to my queen. So I have to play the move knight f5, which is why I play knight e7. If my opponent goes to the move g4, then I can play knight h4, and I'm surviving. So my opponent can't do that. My opponent has to play the move bishop to e4, threatening the knight, which would trying to win the game. Now I play c5. Now my opponent can either take on f5 or take on b7. b7 actually doesn't work because of rook b8 skewering the bishop over here. My opponent would have to take here. I would recapture with the pawn, and this line is actually good for me. The line that is good for white is taking here, which is actually not that hard to find. Simply taking on f5, and arguing that this is the position that they want, which is close up is not that hard to find. But starting from losing this center pawn and playing this really strange and like dank move a4, like I'm not sure if even like a grandmaster would find this. Like this is very, very tricky stuff. So after e5 and d takes e5, my position is actually better. I sack a pawn temporarily, but now I go queen c7 and I'm going to win the pawn back. And now look what I've done to their position. Their pawns are split. My pawns are golden and beautiful. First of all, also I have 5 pawns on light squares. They have a light squared bishop. That's something I like. And not to mention, I have the files. Like these files are going to be mine in the long run. My opponent is like briefly controlling one, but in the long run, I'm probably going to be able to get something going here. My opponent goes bishop to f4, which makes sense, forcing me to trade off my dark-squared bishop, which is a good piece, but it comes with a concession. My opponent is also trading off their bishop pair and letting me have what I want. I take the pawn, of course. My opponent takes back with the bishop, and actually a very interesting idea comes to mind, which is which piece do I take back with? Do I go queen takes e5, or do I go rook takes e5? And on the surface, I mean, okay, obviously you play queen takes e5, right? Obviously you play queen takes e5. It just makes the most sense. You're doubling up on this pawn, and like your queen is pretty active, and like maybe you can go after some pawns in the future, and maybe the knight comes in. I mean, like, oh yeah, obviously queen takes e5. But then I thought a little bit more, and I made the other decision, which is to play the move rook takes e5. And I ended up playing this move because I thought, okay, my queen is actually a really good piece at stopping my opponent from coming in the game. And I thought, why would the queen be active? The queen can't really target stuff on her own. If I get the rook involved first, maybe I can do stuff. Also, I have this idea of doubling the rooks up on the pawn, which is a lot more dangerous than doubling the queen and the rook up on the pawn. And then I kind of want to play f5 in the future as well, so he can take, and I have targets over here, and then maybe my rooks come over here, and everything starts spiraling out of control, and I keep talk really, really fast, and then I not able to form my words properly, and then I'm probably going to have a seizure. And I thought this was pretty decent. So I played with the move rook takes e5. The only reason that queen takes e5 is actually better is because of this idea, and the idea is actually to bring the rooks over here. And I'm not really able to do that with, well, the idea is really to stop queen d3, because I'm able to like go rook a d8 and some variations. Actually, here I have a better move, but we're going to get into that later. I have moves like rook a d8 in this position, and I don't have to waste time. But I didn't really realize that, and I thought rook takes e5 made a lot of sense. My opponent now plays the move queen d3, and gets into a worse position. But here, I'll tell you that I misevaluated kind of everything. I thought my opponent's idea was pretty obvious, and it was to go with the move queen to c8, queen to d6, sorry, and trade off the queens. And I was like, I don't really want a queen trade. For some reason, I was kind of landlocked into the idea that I didn't want a queen trade. That's not correct. Actually, a queen trade would be really good for me. The only thing that I don't really want is actually to like activate his bishop and like not trade the queens in some lines. Actually, the queens being on the board could mess with me in the long run. So I shouldn't have been scared of this threat. I should have probably just thought a little bit harder here. But I ended up playing the very simple move rook a to e8. After some time, a little bit of a lazy move. I'll give you that, a little bit of a lazy move. I didn't calculate everything correctly. I simply thought, okay, now queen d6 is not an option because I'm able to bypass with queen to c8, and you're targeting my rook, but whatever. Now the rook is extra defended, so I don't have to trade with you. That was basically the whole option. But if I took some time and understood the position, I could realize the best move here, which I do find later. The move knight to a4 is very, very powerful here. Simply going after the pawn in this fork, and this would force the queen back to this square, and I actually am able to get immediate play with either queen a5 or knight c5, or even the move b5 here, and I'm telling you, like, looking at this position here, I had to wonder why I didn't play this move, but I just didn't see it. Instead of rook a to e8, a little bit lazy, I have to admit. Bishop to g2 sees my opponent coming back with the bishop, going back to where he's wanted, defending this pawn, reasonable. And I end up going for this pretty interesting plan. I end up deciding, you know what I really want to do? I want to play this rook up, and I will put it on d7, and I want to get on this file. That's my main idea. But I thought if I play that immediately, if I go with this move rook 8 to e7, first of all, my opponent has to move f4, which not sure about. I don't think that this is exactly what I want. But what I really thought was that my opponent could trade the queens like this. And again, I was really, really not wanting to trade the queens. But this position is actually winning for black because of these pawns are just so weak. My rooks are actually much more active than his. And his bishop is still stuck inside. Like, still, like, it hasn't been able to, like, go out for air once during the entire game because of the pawn that they put on e4, which is really, really nice. So I ended up not playing that move, and I played the move king to g7 first to prepare it, because now if I go with this move and queen to d8, queen d8 doesn't come with a check, and I can probably do whatever I want here. Probably do whatever I want. That was basically my intention. I thought, okay, I'm going to be able to do whatever I want. Probably going to play knight a4 then, go after this pawn, and at the end of the day, I thought, okay, probably black is playing this for a win. If you trade my queen, then I thought, okay, I'm probably going to be probably winning this game. Instead of that, I should have just played knight a4 first, and king g7 isn't actually that correct because of some interesting lines from my opponent. But my opponent goes with the move f4 here, which made a little bit of sense. Simply targeting my rook and forcing me to make a decision. Of course, I figured out the right one. The choice is really between rook to e6 or rook to e7. I wasn't considering anything else because I thought there wasn't really a better square. Actually, there is. Rook to a5 is what I need to play, but no, that's crazy. Rook to e6 is the wrong move here, pretty obviously, because I thought in the future this isn't really what I want to do. Like, maybe my opponent will even be able to play something like f5. Like, not right now, but I thought just maybe this could be an idea. The reason why this doesn't work right now is because the pawn on g5. Wait, is it why? Take. Yeah, rook e3, pawn on g5. Yeah, okay, that's right. So I thought that wasn't really exactly what I wanted to do. I thought maybe even he can play the move e4 after rook to e6. So I figured out the best move, which is the move rook 5 to e7. Again, rook a5 is better, but whatever, we do not care. And I'm going here. This is a little bit tricky to find simply because I thought that this rook wasn't really wanting to be there. I thought this rook wanted to be on this rank, but this is a decent transposition of the position. It's a mouthful. My opponent goes c4, which makes some sense. Going for trying to play the move c5 and like kick my knight around, and that kind of pushed my brain into the right direction. So I ended up playing one of the ideas that has been seen like earlier in this game, which is the move knight to a4. But in this case, it's wrong. In this case, it's actually very wrong. The idea is that I'm simply going after this pawn and this fork. Like, okay, the pawn isn't the main focus in this case. I thought, okay, maybe my knight's coming to c5. That was one of the main focuses. Like, in the future, in the long run, my knight might be able to come to c5. Like, for example, after queen c2, I thought maybe the knight could go to c5, and black would have a very pleasant game going after this pawn. Of course, my opponent plays e5, and then we go into some interesting line after f6, but this is all like pretty normal for black, and it feels like black is the one playing here. Instead of that, my opponent has this very, very nice idea, which I missed, and my opponent missed as well, which is to play the move c5, which is just insane. My opponent plays a different move, a different idea, but c5 is crazy. idea is, of course, I can't take it because of the fork of queen takes c3, hitting the king and hitting the knight. Obviously, I can't block with anything due to this pawn, and I would be losing the piece, so I can't do that. But this is actually just really, really bad, and I would be in a decent bit of trouble. But my opponent here misses that crazy idea and instead goes with the idea of queen to d4 check, simply saying that at the end of the day, what they're going to be doing is that after the move f6, which I thought was very natural, stopping the queen's attack, and I thought this move was probably correct because it's also stopping this pawn forward, so I thought it was the best move. Actually, king g8 is better here. But f6, my opponent takes a pawn on a7, and as you can see, I am back in the game. I assume what my opponent thought was going to happen was that I was going to play the move like knight to b2, targeting this pawn, and he thought that this was actually better for white because after a move like rook to d4, and let's say c5, he would actually get some serious play on the pawn on c5. But that was never my intention, and by trading the pawn on a7, by losing the pawn on a7, this gives me incredible play on a much more valuable pawn, the pawn on e4. And after knight c3, black is probably even doing better here. Rook to e1, there's a crazy move here that I didn't play. I played knight takes e4 because it was the most logical stuff, but there's a crazy move here. The move queen to d8 is the move. I mean, what are we even doing with queen to d8? The idea is that I'm just getting in. I'm just getting into the position. There's not much my opponent can do. If my opponent comes back here, well, my opponent has to come back. But now I go knight takes e4, and after this long little scuffle here, actually black has serious play on these pawns, and of course you can't let my queen into the position, so you'd have to bring your queen back. If you try to, I don't know, what would you even do here otherwise? Like kick my knight out or something. Like, I mean, even moves like b6 here. Like seriously crazy stuff. But after rook e1, I simply take on e4, and I thought, okay, black is doing pretty well, and I thought black was actually winning the game. King to h2 is a miss, allowing me to have even more crazy ideas of knight d2, attacking this pawn, and there's not much he can do, because if he like moves his rook out of the way, I get rook e2, and after takes, and let's say, I don't even know what you play here. Like, this is, I actually don't even see a move for white. Let's say you sort of save the pawn with like queen here. Well, that's a fork, right, of knight to b3. So I don't know, queen to a4 here, defending the pawn. Then I can even just immediately go in with rook e2, and I mean, I have every piece staring at his king. This is probably going to be either a checkmate or a complete win of material. So I thought this was correct, but after king h2, I was awash with a sense of creativity, and I didn't play any of those moves. I ended up playing another insane move. I played the move g5. And when I found this move, I was pretty happy. If you can't tell, g5 is crazy. And the idea is that, okay, well, how does that work? Aren't you just losing a pawn? Well, of course you can't take right away to this check, which is obvious, but why don't we take the knight first? And after the recapture, isn't this just a free pawn? Well, or a complete like loss of the black position. Well, no, because after taking here, I simply go for the throw with a checkmate of rook e2, and this is kind of what I calculated, and I realized that it doesn't matter which way you take. My original idea was after bishop takes e4, I thought that maybe I could play g takes f4 here, but I ended up kind of not liking this because maybe even I thought maybe my king was a little bit too exposed. I wasn't sure about this. Computer already gives the move rook e to b1 a chance, and black would be in a boatload of trouble. I can't take the bishop because I would be losing my queen, which is insane. Instead of that, my opponent decides to go with the move queen d4, which is really active, and now I find another series of moves that manages to keep my advantage afloat. I go with the move c5 first, hitting the queen, and making him make a decision. Where are you going to go? Obviously, the idea here was to take the pawn in the future because the queen would be pinning this pawn to the king, and he would have some, and I would have some decent problems. Queen to e3 is the move chosen, and now I still don't move the knight. I go with the move g takes f4 here, hitting the queen again, and arguing that I'm going to split even more of your pawns because, of course, the more pawn islands my opponent has, I feel more happy. So I'm like, okay, that seems pretty good. And after queen takes f4, which is what he should have played, I would trade the queens, and I would probably play a move like knight to d6. And I'm gonna argue that black is pushing here, which they are, which I would be pushing here, but it's actually a little more complicated than that, and probably it would end up being a draw in the long run because my opponent has pretty interesting moves like, okay, let's say my opponent doesn't play the insane moves. My opponent plays like bishop d5. This is already kind of rough because what my opponent's threatening here is like not allowing my king in. He's trying to cut off my king with moves like this. And I mean, I already have to do some wacky stuff like king g6 is the best move here. Simply because I can't have my king cut off. By the way, the threat, if I play something like b6, is after rook g1. I can't bring my king over and around because after this move it would be checkmate, and I don't want to bring my king over to this side because then my king would be cut off permanently and I'm not going to be able to get back into the game. So I thought queen takes f4 was the best move, but my opponent surprised me again with the move g takes f4 and decides to keep the queens on the board yet again. And now I figured out that I'm actually winning a pawn here, and I'm going to have a very good position. I play the perfect move, the right move. I play knight to g5, another crazy move, opening up an attack against the queen, and it looks like I'm sacrificing a knight, but not really because of this pin against the king. And I realized that I'm just going to be winning the pawn. Queen moves to the side. I go rook takes e1, and rook takes e1 again. And after queen takes e1, I am picking up the pawn on f4, and I'm actually winning. Well, almost winning. It's very close to being winning. The only way that it's not winning is if my opponent finds a very, very nice move, queen to g3. And basically the point is that I can't take on c4 because of the move h4, which would win the knight. So I'd have to trade and play the move b6. And at the end of the day, this is a theoretical draw, but of course it's always nicer to be up a pawn than to be down a pawn. But my opponent doesn't find it and instead plays the move king to h1, and black is actually winning this time. But only for a couple of moves. I'm only winning here if I play the move knight to f3, attacking the queen, threatening mate, forcing him to trade off the bishop, and get into this position where I can even play a move like king f7, not allowing the queen in, and this is actually just already game over for white, since I'm up a very, very nice pawn, and their pawns are all split, which means that they will be easy to pick off in the future. Of course they can try, but this is a game. We're not going to be analyzing a full game inside of a game, which it feels like I've done since this recording is already like 30 minutes or something crazy. But instead I do the logical thing and I take on c4, which is a free pawn and does give black a small advantage. But now it's a little bit dicey. My opponent goes queen to e7. I decided that I should probably play the move king to g6 because I didn't think that if I brought my knight back I would be doing anything good, because I thought maybe there's even like bishop e5 in some lines and you try to sack here and try to get some stuff. I didn't want to get any part of that, so I was like, that's probably the best move. King to g6, queen takes b7, and this is my last chance to win. My last chance to win the game right now. What I didn't realize here was my opponent's threats. If I played it calm, played it safe, I probably would have won this game very, very easily after this point. But I did not. What I did instead was realize my opponent's threat and then completely disregard it. Instead, I went after the pawn. I went queen to c1, which is the right move, and after king h2, I played a massive blunder. I took on a3. And the reason why this is a blunder, for those of you who are like pretty good at tactics, is that actually I'm losing a piece here. The knight. G4, H4 is the way to go. Some reasons giving us a mistake for knight f7. I feel like that's stupid because it's the only way to play on. The other line is just ridiculous. Like, we're not even going to go into it. H4, I play the move knight f7, which is the best move. Shut up, engine. And here I'm losing a piece. My opponent has a very nice move, h5, which forces the move king g7, and now simply goes with the move bishop to d5. And what I missed here from a distance, it's not that I missed this idea. It's not that I missed this idea. It's that I missed that my opponent cuts off my checks. And I don't have any ways to check the king. I'm not going to be able to be in time with counterplay because in many positions, I'm able to come back in a round. For example, if I had some checks here, I'd be able to come back in a round and like get the queen over here and be able to pick up this pawn defending the knight, which was kind of my plan from the ending. I was just like, okay, I'm going to figure something out. But that's wrong. And after bishop d5, I have to go in crazed, like, oh my god, I've blundered it, I've bungled it, I have to draw this game, I have to be able to survive. So I play the move queen to c3, which is the best move, defending both pawns, which is what I have to do. My opponent takes on f7, I go king h6, of course the only move, and my opponent goes with the move queen to e6. And I'm playing quickly. I have 30 seconds on the clock. I've bungled it. I have to do something cool. I go queen to d2 check. The bishop is going back. And then what I do, I just simply go with this check. King goes up to h3, and I take on h5. And I thought this was the only chance for black, because now I'm threatening a checkmate. My opponent will have to make a draw with me, which is correct. So my opponent makes draw with me. They go queen f7, and the perpetual check ensues. I have 17 seconds on the clock, but it's enough. And after king here, my opponent decides to continue the perpetual check with the move queen takes c5. And after the move f5 here, my opponent continues the perpetual check and makes sure that they don't blunder the game away by playing the move queen to c3, blundering checkmate in 1. And that's what I've got for you today. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys found this entertaining, instructive, all of the above. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, do all the normal things YouTubers tell you to do. And yeah, if you're here this far, this is a 40-minute long video. I mean, like, thank you. Yeah, but that's it. Good evening and good night.